Welcome to today's episode where we sit down with one of the leading finance newsletters on the internet, the unmistakable Green Chicken. Yes, today we chat with the one and only Doomberg. Doomberg is a leading voice on energy, hard tech, policy, and how all of that is impacting the global economy. They have a distinct tone and memorable brand, and they've taken a very business-centric approach to growing their newsletter over the past few years. Today, we uncover the story behind Doomberg and how they've grown into the top finance newsletter on Substack. Let's get to it. Hello, Doomberg. Thanks for joining us today. Really excited to chat with you.
Great. Congratulations on all of your recent life accomplishments, and more than happy to join you on your new podcast. Congratulations on the show. I think it's going to be a great success, and more than honored to be among the first guests.
Thank you. Yeah, my wife and I just made it across the country, driving across the country, and we're still together, so that was a pretty big milestone.
Well, yeah, if you can drive across the country with somebody, then that's probably a good indication that you selected an appropriate life partner.
And we had a dog, so that was an extra little wrinkle that went according to plan.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so maybe to kick things off, I feel like you have one of the most compelling origin stories out there. And so I want to kind of dig into that and hear how Doomberg came to exist. If I'm correct, your background is as a trained scientist working in like kind of hard tech sectors like commodities and energy. And one of the things that you've said before that I really liked was that you have some experience explaining really complex topics to execs or budget owners or people who need to make like investment decisions. And those can be very costly decisions. And I'm just curious to kick things off, like how has that experience impacted how you write and how you approach Doomberg?
Yeah, it's a great question. And maybe I'll give a bit of the background story so that my answer makes a bit more sense. So yes, I'm a trained scientist, spent a couple of decades in industry, in hardcore commodities, predominantly in leadership roles in the research side of things. So, managing teams of scientists and PhDs and technicians who are looking to uncover the latest developments in catalysis or in the transformation of molecules that make the world go round, and various other technologies, and did well. And my differentiating contribution, I believe, in hindsight, looking back at my career, was my ability to write internal explanations for what it is that we were doing, why we should continue doing it, and then most importantly, why we shouldn't be doing other things. And that's pretty valuable, I think, in the finance world. I do also have finance training, and other members of the Doomberg team come from more hardcore finance, private equity, and venture capital than the experience I brought to the table. But in my personal career, I was able to climb the corporate ladder based on my ability to communicate to non-scientists in financial language that they could understand.
It's so fascinating. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Yeah.
It reminds me, one of the things that if you ask a lot of people I used to work with back in the streaming world, I think the one thing they would probably all say is I used to write really long emails. And those were like kind of early Growth Croissant 1.0 blog posts. And the only difference was I wasn't publishing them to the internet. I was just sending them to like our team internally. And so, yeah, what you said kind of resonated with me.
So in the corporate culture that I grew up in, and it's an old iconic name that everyone would recognize, prior to important executive meetings, the various participants in that meeting that might be advocating for a certain policy decision would write 3 to 4 page white papers outlining their decision. And all of these white papers would be aggregated to the senior executives tasked with making the decision. And from the technology side, I gained a reputation as a particularly effective advocate for that medium. And if you actually think about it, Doomberg pieces are effectively those articles but written for the public. Yeah. And this was my passion in life. You know, one of our big beliefs in the chicken coop here is that you should begin with what you love to do that doesn't feel like work, and then eliminate everything else from your life, and wonderful things just magically happen, like money falls out of the sky. And we lived that motto. And my journey through life began with that skill set, which then went dormant for a while. it became very frustrating for me personally and for the other members of the other founding members of the Doomberg team to stay in corporate America. Things were changing, especially in the commodity sector. You have to remember the period between the great financial crisis and the energy crisis of 2021 was really a deep bear market in commodities with a few very short periods of relative reprieve. And my job became firing people. I fired literally hundreds of people over the last few years of my career, directly and indirectly, of course. But as you lead larger and larger teams, you do less of the firing yourself personally, although I tried my best to be involved with as many of them as I could. But I remember the moment I decided I had to quit. Like I literally got a note of incentivization from my boss for a future bonus that was predicated on how many positions I eliminated in the next 12 months. And I remember I went home and I poured a drink and I looked at my wife and I just can't do this anymore. So I left corporate America with a few friends who were of similar mind, and we decided we had a crazy experiment, which worked until COVID. We said, look, we create all of our value in 20% of our time, and we waste the other 80% of it. And let's just say we're all paid 100 units of value for the full amount of our time. What if we developed a product that represented just that 20%, the stuff we love to do? Strategic analysis, corporate advising, and so on, with none of the BS, none of the training, nothing, just literally only what we love to do. And we sell it for 40 units of value 5 times over for each of us. And in theory, we should be able to do only what we love and double our income. That was literally the genesis of the first experiment that we did by the team that eventually became Doomberg. And it worked by and large. Go ahead.
Was this the consulting for creators? Yeah. So
No. This was consulting for corporate.
Before COVID.
Yes, for corporate, for C-suite executives, and for wealthy family offices. And that worked. Gotcha. And we didn't sell all of our time, but we sold enough of our time that we more than replicated our salaries before we quit. And also we were just living superior lives because you're just doing the things you love all day and you've eliminated all of the BS or most of the BS. And that worked, but it's still a selling time business. And you come from the startup world and you know that a selling time business is capped, whereas a scaling time business is uncapped. But we'll come back to that. So then COVID hit. And COVID was a real disaster for us, as it was for countless small business owners. We had built a very good book of business, doing what we loved. We were doing at least as good as we were doing in the corporate world, but on our terms. And I was home for dinner with I used to take 75 flights a year as an executive, right? And pretending that I was a father, but I wasn't really a father. In hindsight, of course, you rationalize a lot of things as you're trying to sort of climb. So that all worked great. Then COVID hit, and we literally lost 85% of our business in the span of a month.
Wow.
We had a record billing year in April and a record billing year in June for the opposite reason. And look, I mean, COVID was a disaster for countless small businesses, including ours, and that was what we like to call internally our high pucker factor moment. Did we make a mistake? Should we just go get jobs? After a few years of living this kind of life, it was inconceivable that we could go back to the corporate world.
Bit of a one-way door.
Yeah,
when you switch
really
out.
is. The headhunters stop calling and all of this stuff because you're just off their radar. And we lived all of that. And you lose the pedigree of the big position. And so we looked at each other and we said, we're going to reinvent ourselves. This is a temporary emergency. We have our skills. We have our network. We have our friendship. We have our collaboration. And we decided to reinvent ourselves. And a famous hedge fund manager who we had become friendly with gave us a really brilliant piece of advice, which was that we should consider developing an offering, and by offering, I mean start consulting in the space of content creators who sell into Wall Street. And his view was there's a lot of really great stuff out there, and many of them don't have the corporate business expertise that you guys have. Maybe you ought to ponder developing an offering in that space. You have some social media savvy. You certainly have some marketing savvy. You know the finance world. You could write. Why don't you build a book of business doing that? And it worked. And we decided to do that. And by the way, all along this journey, we're experimenting with half a dozen other business models that failed,
Yep.
or did okay, and we didn't lose much money, but we learned something, and we did all manner of stuff. You know how it is when you're a hustler. Like we were just hustling,
Totally.
right?
Yep.
And
Throwing stuff
and
at the wall, seeing what sticks.
yeah, and like we had a bunch of crazy ideas, which I won't say here because it'll like reveal our identity. But you'd laugh. But to our team's credit, like we were always willing to try and quick to fail.
So
And
how did you get in touch with like your initial client
yeah,
base in the content creator world?
we knew a bunch of people in the content creator world, and they were aware of our work. And I'm a consummate networker, so I'm the sort of front of house for this business. And as you know, we've
Hmm.
gotten to know each other in real life, and we're always willing to give and to take time. And one of our big beliefs is that giving is infinitely valuable. If you just give, the karma of giving is such that you will never really go poor. Friends, and look, not everybody will repay you, and some people will disappoint you, but that's all irrelevant. That's noise. Like one
Yep.
person will repay you in a way that is life changing, like this hedge funds manager did by taking this call and giving us this great piece of advice. And so we had developed a way to build a consulting book of business without giving away too many secrets. And we exercised those techniques and started calling our friends who we knew in that space and made some compelling offers. And one of them bit. And this person is a dear friend. And we partnered with that person to really transform their business. And they were grateful and generous, and also then became the spokesperson for our business. And we got other clients because of his
Right. So like
recommendation. And
first domino falls, then you get some other
yeah,
clients.
exactly. Hey, wow, this person is really helpful. I highly recommend you take them. And then, of
Yep.
course, it becomes who you select to accept after that, because at this point, it's still a selling time business.
Right.
And then the fateful day came. So we love our first client. Again, he's actually one of the few clients we've kept. We've put the rest of our consulting business on runoff as we have focused on Doomberg. And we had an ongoing joke with this person that you should listen to more of our advice. And
Yeah.
to be fair, it's his business, and he's doing amazing. And there were certain things he just either didn't want to do, or and so he said, why don't you guys start your own thing? Because in the intervening time, we sort of pitched in and helped on the creator side, because I'm a good writer, and another member of the Doomberg team is a world-class editor and a great copywriter. And we had the
Yeah.
skills, Photoshop, social media savvy, to just jump in and do a few things when needed. And he just said, why don't you do your own? Like, I'll support
That's
you.
some life. That's definitely some life changing
Oh, life
advice right
changing,
there.
life changing. Like, we are forever grateful to this angel who both
Yeah.
took a chance on us as our first client, and then also strongly
Pushed you,
recommended. And
pushed you
then,
off
by
the
the way,
ledge.
as we have succeeded, couldn't be more happy, genuinely happy, grateful, for us. A truly a sweet soul who transformed our lives. And then so Doomberg was born, and then we can get into that.
Yeah. So when you were going into this world of people publishing stuff on the internet and building a business around it, did you have like a really strong intuition on the advice you were giving and the guidance, and even like the stuff you were doing behind the scenes, or was it a lot of learning as you went?
Mostly the former. We have been very well trained in corporate America. Again, one thing about working in a Fortune 50 company is you get good business training. And I do believe that the fundamentals of building a business are universal. And I'm sure we'll talk about the various
Yeah.
aspects of that here. But we basically just took what we had learned, our knowledge of marketing and finance, and our pretty decent foundation in social media. We had studied social media. We'd had a few forays into the space. Again, failure as an entrepreneur is nothing more than a great opportunity to learn, as long as you don't run out of money.
Right.
And we paid a lot for failures. And
Yeah.
in hindsight, it was some of the best NPV investments we've ever made. Because
Net present value for,
Yes, sorry, yes.
non-finance listeners.
Yes, the return on that capital has been very, very handsome, because it's one thing, like, actually, especially early on, if you have too much success too early, you begin to believe your own stuff. And
Yeah.
nothing more humbling than a string of failures to make you really get down to brass tacks and understand what it takes to be successful. And as you know, as an entrepreneur with an exit behind you, I'm sure you have a very similar story of trial and error, and despair, and then stick-to-itness. And And this is really the journey. By the way, it's what makes success sweet. If you just succeed the first time, like I don't know, it just feels like it's unearned. So that's the real story is our corporate training applied to. I believe it's universal. Now we spent a lot of time studying that market as we were helping the first few clients that we were able to secure. And that all of that studying, which helped our clients, of course, helped us as we launched Doomberg.
So I think the answer to this question is no, but I want to press on it. When you were switching over into this world of working with people publishing on the internet, did you have any idea that something like Doomberg would happen, where you would start your own publication, or were you just doing this as like pure play consulting business?
Absolutely no idea that this is what would happen. And it was purely, we've just lost 85% of our business. What are we going to do to feed our families for the next year?
Yeah.
And to dip into our savings to the least amount.
Yeah. Necessity is the mother of invention. Is that the quote?
And we spent a good solid year in a space before it even conceived to us that we could do this. It was literally at the urging of our first client who strongly suggested it and committed to helping us, which is also important.
Really amazing.
Yeah, and good luck. Look, when luck comes your way, I mean, you got to go, you got to take it. And as soon as we thought of the idea, the editor-in-chief of Doomberg, who you know, was brilliant and conceived of the brand after an afternoon of brainstorming, and then we just started. We just launched. And when I read our earliest stuff, I cringe, of course. But
yeah,
it just
that's pretty normal, I feel like. Okay, so let's get into the day zero when you're turning on the light switch for Doomberg. One of the things you've said that really stuck with me was how y'all did a character sketch of your ideal customer right from the start. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about who it was, or and how you used that to inform kind of your early decision making.
We stole this concept from Jeff Bezos. So one of our big beliefs is that you should study people who have succeeded and steal every good idea they have. And they're more than happy to give it away. And Jeff Bezos had a maniacal focus on delighting his customers from the very beginning when Amazon was just shipping books. It's kind of cliche now, and I get all of that. But I do think there is wisdom in the cliche. Things become cliche because they're actually so true that people repeat it so often. And I remember watching a video of Jeff Bezos being interviewed about delighting his customers. And he just kept repeating the answer as though the interviewee wasn't really getting it. And it was really just quite brilliant. And it's one of those interviews that sticks with you. So once you've decided that you exist to delight your customers, then the next question is who are your customers? And how do you find them? And I do believe that one of the biggest failure modes of many entrepreneurs, be it bloggers, small business owners, or startups, is they spend far too little time dwelling on who it is that they're going to sell to and what do they want. And by the way, there has to be an overlap between what you're willing to produce and what these people want. So you can't fake it, because then it becomes inauthentic. But if you're going to sell into Wall Street, you have to understand their buying preferences, how they consume, what they like to consume. And so we wrote 3 or 4 character sketches. I remember a couple of them now. And we've always stayed true. Like one of them was Brad. And we asked ourselves in the early days, as we would publish a Doomberg piece, or we would write a tweet or so on, does this delight Brad?
The name of the fictional person was Brad.
One of the fictional persons. Another one was Jenny, I believe. And we would write character sketches like, how much are they worth? How many cars do they own? How big is their house? Where do they live?
It's a hypothetical day that they go through.
Right.
Kind of thing.
And one of the things that really jumped out of us is that they used to be on Wall Street and they manage their own money, because we're not selling to institutional. Doomberg is a retail product. And they loved their Bloomberg terminal so much that they pay for it themselves out of pocket. This was a big insight for us. And so like the original construct of the Doomberg brand was Chicken Little gets a terminal.
Yeah.
And our ideal clients they pay for a terminal, and terminals aren't cheap. Like, I don't know if people know what a Bloomberg terminal costs. One seat is $28,000 a year. This is not. So we ultimately decided that we were targeting sophisticated retail, and that means that a lot of things like are off the table. So, for example, we decided early on that we would never sell ads against our email list because Brad doesn't want to see an ad. Brad would rather pay for a premium product than to be exposed to ads. We've never discounted. Brad doesn't want a deal on a Rolex. Brad wants people to know that he can afford one. And by the way, like if that's just one sort of mosaic of an ideal customer that you could target. Like Walmart targets a different mosaic of customers, and has done so really, really successfully. It just understand who your customer is and make sure your entire brand experience is consistent with their expectations.
One thing, and so you also mentioned Rolex, and not wanting a discount on a Rolex. I think one thing that's also important to note is Doomberg's price in the context of your ICP, ideal customer profile. Because Doomberg's price is pretty high compared to maybe some of the other paid newsletters. But in the context of a $28,000 terminal, maybe not so much.
Interesting that you should say that, because when we launched at that price point, we got a lot of hate mail from people. If you would be $10, I would pay you. And of course, if we had launched at $10, those same people would be saying, if you had launched at $5, we would pay you. Because we knew our ideal clients, we were able to dismiss the original noise. And since we have launched, we're now actually below the median of the top 10 finance substacks. We've never raised our price. And we also have a second tier, of course, our pro tier, which is much higher than our standard. But I think the success of Doomberg, quote unquote, despite that high price, has emboldened other financial newsletters on Substack to charge much higher. And if you just peruse the leaderboard of the top 10 paid finance Substacks in the world, we're actually, I would argue, a bit of a bargain, which is fine. Like, we priced it right for us. But what was once a controversial decision, I think, is now quite normal.
One of my favorite pricing stories is I saw your friend Edwin Dorsey, post on Twitter about he was like considering increasing his price, and he just wanted to like ask people what they thought about that. And this was back when FinTwit was a big thing. I'm not sure if that's still happening on Twitter, but he got a lot of responses, and they were like, I would love for you to increase your price so that less people read your newsletter, so that I get more like exclusive insight. I always thought that was really fascinating. Like people telling him to increase his price. That's like a very unique dynamic.
Well, if you think about our ideal client, so our price point is $300 a year, and $1,200 for Pro. And Pro gets the Articles Plus, an extra webinar a month, and an exclusive email to have direct access to the Doomberg team. To our ideal clients, that is a small amount of money relative to value. And if you create the value, then they'll happily pay it. And by the way, we have, how many times do you think that we have been approached by somebody with an EDU email address asking for a discount that we just comped? 100% of the time. Like, and ultimately, your pricing strategy is just a means to identify your greatest supporters. And as long as the integral of the revenue you generate from that price point is way more than enough than you need, doing only what you love, which for us is more than true, then the rest is just gravy.
How much have your ideal customer profiles changed over time? Are the Brads still there? Are the other ones kind of still hanging around, or has your thinking evolved at all?
It has not. And there's enough Brads in the world for us to build a business of the size that is more than enough for us. We have this this belief here, which is never succumb to the disease of more. We have achieved so far beyond our wildest imagination that the worst thing we could do is move the goalposts on what our expectations are from here. And
Yeah.
and when you catch lightning in a bottle, when you find what it is that you're meant to be doing in life, just keep doing it. It's not that hard. Like I show up, I make the number go up, and I repeat. Like that's my life. And I've systematically removed anything in my life that feels like I have to. And I've filled my calendar, which has no meetings on it other than podcast schedules, with nothing but get tos. I get to do this podcast with Reed, after which I'm going to go home and I get to begin to fill out the next piece, which I have, built out of my head. And then I get to watch the things I want to watch and read the things I want to read and hang out with my kids and so on, and then do it all over again tomorrow. And what a privilege. And why would I spoil that privilege by infecting my days with activities that I hate doing in the pursuit of abstract digits online in a bank account somewhere? Like I live an extraordinarily blessed life. I'm surrounded by people I love. I get to do what I love all day. And I, as a consequence of accumulating enough Brads and Jennifers, I'm supported by people who love our work financially, to the extent that by some miracle, through this epic journey of corporate ladder to entrepreneur to COVID crushing us to rebuilding our business to finding what we were meant to do and then succeeding beyond our wildest dreams. Why would I risk allowing the desire for some next level of wealth ruin the pleasure that can be extracted from having achieved what we have already achieved? I feel sad for such people, actually.
Yeah. Well, it's there's like a society thing almost where it's so hard to live the lifestyle or the mindset that you're describing, because like the number going up is so addicting, and wanting to race for a bigger email list or a bigger paid subscriber balance or just more revenue.
We love when those numbers go up and we celebrate it, but it doesn't consume us. There's things we won't do.
And it sounds like your worldview holds steady and you're still targeting the same ICPs that you started off with. So you're not like bending Doomberg towards some tangential peripheral audience. It doesn't quite feel right to maybe what Doomberg is about and what y'all stand for.
And beyond that, we've only scratched the surface of the addressable market. So heading into 2024, we had spent a grand total of less than $10,000 developing Doomberg and zero on customer acquisition. And we know that's the wrong number. And we can get into why we know that and some of the first steps we're doing. And I'm happy to discuss it all with you. But I have a shocking stat that I'll share with you when we go down that road. But we have barely scratched the surface of our addressable market. And look, we have churn like everybody else. But, I personally know, and you would advise, and anybody with any knowledge of the startup world would say, that a budget of zero for customer acquisition is not optimized for the product market fit that we've been able to establish.
Right.
And we are beginning the journey using the same principles we have of changing that, which is itself a really deep rabbit hole that we can go down. But we built it without that, and so now that's the next step in our journey.
I do want to hit the Doomberg brand before we get into the operational stuff, because the chicken is so memorable. It's very green. Doomberg as a title of a publication is like really sticks with you. And I've heard some of this seems to fall out of your kind of like your personality or worldview, which I've heard you describe as defensive pessimism, if I'm getting that right.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'd love to, and you mentioned Chicken Little earlier. Maybe just provide the listeners with a little bit of like an overview of like what led, like why the green chicken and why Doomberg.
So Great question. So let's talk about brand for a minute. And we stole this from a really great book. You know, when you read a great book and the lessons stick with you, that's testimony to the brilliance of the author. And we read a great book during our corporate world. You know, part of your, hey, we're going to go away and like, you know, read great books together and all this other nonsense. So the book was called The Brand Gap. I can't remember the author's name, but if you Google The Brand Gap, you'll find it. It's a great book. Take you an hour to read it. And there's a really powerful description of what a brand is in that book that really stuck with us. And it's as follows. Brand is the gut feeling you induce in your ideal clients when they interact with your product. And brand is a gut feeling that you induce in your ideal clients. Those are three separate parts, right? So you can't have a proactive brand ambition without knowing who your ideal clients are, which is why we spend a lot of time identifying them. And then we spend a lot of time in the newsletter business prior to launching Doomberg. And we settled on the following gut feeling that we wish to induce in our ideal clients when they interact with our product. And it's as follows. When our email shows up in their inbox, the gut feeling induced is, ooh, I get to read that. Not, I should read that because I pay for it, or not, I might read that later on, let me print it out. No, I get to read that. And then we had a whole afternoon brainstorming session around what kind of product would we have to deliver in order to induce that gut feeling in our ideal clients. And we settled on the following three aspects of our brand. We shall be provocative without being polarizing. So everybody likes to be made to think, but nobody likes really to consume deep red meat. I mean, some people do, but not our ideal clients. We should be funny without being silly. Humor is a big part of Doomberg, especially in the captions of our pictures and the occasional dry joke. That inside joke, I get that joke because I've always read Doomberg and I'm on the inside, is really powerful for engagement, but also just fun to do. You know that you're pleasing your ideal clients when you do that. And then we shall teach without being self-indulgent. Brad would like to learn, but not have it being stuffed in his face that he is being taught by a superior. So humility, authenticity, admitting our mistakes, learning together. We try to behave as peers to our subscribers, as opposed to oracles. And I think that's a really important part of our brand ambition. Go ahead.
On that last point, one of the definitive characteristics of Doomberg is that you're anonymous. And I saw you mention this somewhere, that you wanted to do that so that the focus was on the work and not the personality around the work. And there's a lot of personalities in the kind of finance world. So I thought that was a very smart move. Go ahead.
That's one of the reasons. The primary driver for anonymity originally was we had no social media presence under the masthead. And as a growth hack, you can't be remembered if you don't stand out. And so the whole conception of the Doomberg brand and Chicken Little gets a terminal and our brand ambition, back to the original question of the origin story of the Doomberg concept. Brad and our other ideal client, Mosaics, have achieved a certain semblance of wealth in life and deep down are deathly afraid of losing it. And so they do a lot of doom scrolling. Defensive pessimism, which you referred to earlier, is something that I'm afflicted with. And what that means, for those who are unaware, is that you spend a lot of time dwelling on worst case scenario risk, which you are more than happy to overspend to abate, which then liberates you to achieve at a high level because your foundation is strong. And so the preparedness movement would be an example of doom scrolling. I think the success of Zero Hedge is testimony to doom scrolling. And so we sort of always view ourselves as defensive pessimists. Here's worst case scenario risk. Early on, we were probably a little too alarmist relative to the facts. We have since shaved that off a bit and become a bit more realistic. You learn as you go. But yeah, the origin story is this sort of doom scrolling on the part of people who have succeeded, who love their families, and who don't want to give back that success. And so they're constantly looking for things to worry about and developing intelligent strategies to abate those risks.
And for those who haven't read the story around Chicken Little in a little while, could you remind the listeners how all this ties into Chicken Little and like why the green chicken?
Well, the Chicken Little story is, of course, that this worrywart was warning about catastrophe, and catastrophe never came. And then the one time a real catastrophe was on the horizon, nobody believed Chicken Little. Um, and so the thing about doom scrolling is you're wrong a lot. Like if you're writing about edge case risk, most of the time it doesn't materialize, and all of the times it doesn't materialize, you're happy that it didn't. So the analogy I would use is I buy home insurance every year, and insurance is a great business for the sellers of insurance. Like Warren Buffett owns Geico for a reason, but we all buy insurance anyway. And when my house doesn't burn down on December 31st for the calendar year 2023, I don't begrudge the premiums I paid that year. I go ahead and pay them again for 2024. And so Chicken Little, Doomberg, defensive pessimism, in the beginning, more so than now, was about tapping into that. Because don't forget, this was the post-COVID era. We just went through this major crisis. So Doomberg originally, and by the way, we came to prominence during an energy crisis, the European energy crisis in particular, which was, in hindsight and full transparency, truly beneficial for the growth of Doomberg because of our industry experience and our ability to comment on the news of the day in a way that people could understand. And so, yeah, that was sort of the beginning of Doomberg. But as you grow, as you go paid, as you mature as a team, you soften those edges a bit. You become a little less sensational and a little more practical, and you begin to manage things differently. Again, when we were free, you could say what you want, but when we're paid, we view that as a bit sort of a higher level of professionalism that we need to deliver for our paying customers.
On that note, I thought your journey to launching paid was pretty unique as well. You went for, I think, a full year publishing for free only, and then flipped the switch to launch paid. And pretty much everything after that has been paywalled. And, free readers will get an occasional free preview. Get to that in a second. But what was the thinking behind that decision to kind of go all free first year? And, like you mentioned earlier, Doomberg's never going to do ads. So you were effectively publishing for free for a full year. Could you just walk us through that moment in time and some of the decision making behind it?
Yeah, sure. So you have to remember that we had an existing book of business in the consulting world that more than supplied the necessary budget for our families so that we could invest the time needed to build Doomberg. We believe, at least early on, that Substack's advice of turning on the paywall from the beginning is a mistake. And we expressed this to the Substack team. We talked with you about it while you were there. We decided to do this on our own. We understand not everyone would be in that position to be able to deploy as much time as we did to Doomberg for free for a full year. But our view was the bigger your audience is when you turn on the paywall, the more lucrative it can be, and you undoubtedly grow faster when everything is free. And so to the extent that you're still getting impressions and engagements and emails through that customer journey, which we can talk about, which is universal for all content creators, and you're growing at an exponential rate, as we went from 0 to 44,000 emails in that year before we hit the paywall. And then we had also decided that the manner in which we would go paid, which you alluded to, would be something that most people didn't do, which was we would have everything go behind the paywall except for the first third of every piece, and we would write specifically to the cut to paid. And so each Doomberg piece still to this day has two objectives: delight our existing subscribers. So the what comes before and after the cut to paid has to delight them, but also entice free people who may be pondering whether to subscribe to come over the line because they have to finish reading that piece. I think the freemium model is flawed, and I think most people underprice their product, which is another issue. And so our view of writing to a cut to paid, where that's sort of the standard industry logo in the newsletter business would be hook story offer, right? You catch people's attention with a good story, you give them a bit of an appetizer, and then to eat the meal, you have to go behind paid. But now, the way Substack is structured, it's not like you can send different emails to free and paid in an easy way. And so we have to write these such that our paying subscribers, of course, are going to know where the cut to paid is, but also what comes after the cut to paid is meaty enough to justify staying a paid subscriber. But what comes before the cut to paid is enticing enough so that those who have been on our email list for a while and have to see 6, 7, 8, 9, 20 previews, you'd be surprised when we do the analytics. They eventually decide, okay, I have to pay and I want to get behind the paywall. And so that's the balance we took. Build a big free list, then go paid, charge the appropriate price, and put everything behind the paywall. But put enough before the paywall so that old free subscribers and new ones who show up get a sense of what's behind the paywall. And then always make sure that your existing customers feel delighted.
I was, you mentioned like looking at some of your earlier posts and kind of getting, a little tiny cringe feeling. I was looking at some of your first year posts before we hopped on, and at the bottom, you would kind of consistently mention how many views your posts were getting, or how many email list, how your email list was growing post to post. I thought that was really, really fascinating.
So that was actually a monthly letter that we did in the beginning before we went paid. And we have done a few since putting on the paywall called the Work of My Life Report.
Okay. Yep.
Where we would authentically share, as you know, we're open books, right? And we help any Substack author that reaches out to us, and we give away all our secrets on podcasts. And like we don't feel as though we've developed some like privileged intellectual property that we need to protect. We have achieved this amazing life experience, and we're more than happy to share and to help others. And we did that with our audience under the assumption that there's, again, back to this whole, each piece is either to delight our customer or to convert new ones. There are two types of pieces that you can write as a newsletter author as well. One, which is to drive impressions, and the other is to drive engagement. And engagement is the holy grail of delighting ideal customers, and having them feel as though they're part of the journey and cheering you on is, and by the way, we were very authentic in these pieces. This is how we wanted to live. So it's not like it was some phony attempt to trick people into liking us. This is who we are as people. You've gotten to know us in real life. I think you would agree. And so we wrote those because they were fun to write. So like some of my favorite Doomberg pieces, and we've written 265 of them now. One of my favorite is one of those Work of My Life pieces called "These Chairs Won't Sell Themselves," where we talked about the Eames. Eames chair.
That was a good one.
One of my favorites since going behind the paywall was "Strange Victory," where we talked about the disease of more, and we talked about the late great David Berman and his struggles with mental health. And he wrote this really amazing song called "Strange Victory, Strange Defeat." And the piece only includes the first half of that, because that's our intent. Which is to see the victory and ignore the potential defeat that you can go find. Like if you're going looking for defeat, you can go find it, right? Like you can shift your goalposts, and it's personally my favorite song, and it was one of our most beautiful pieces. And those Work of My Life pieces, since we've gone paid, unfortunately, when you get as big as we do, they can come across now as a bit extractive, even though they're not intending to be. And so we've sort of let that part of our content creation cycle dissipate. It's unfortunate, but like if you get big enough, people don't believe that you're authentic, and they're always looking for reasons to say that you're phony. Yeah, and that's just the reality of becoming relatively big.
They think you're using the platform to boost somebody else's audience,
or to play on people's emotions for your own benefit. So, for example, when we wrote our piece Notes on X, when we decided that we were no longer going to participate on the company formerly known as Twitter, a few people said, this feels extractive, in the sense that we had asked our audience for help. Like, hey, we're leaving this growth engine, and there are ways that you can help us, and here's how. But we authentically left the growth engine, and we genuinely would appreciate the help of our audience to continue to grow. Who doesn't want to grow? We want to grow. But that doesn't mean we've succumbed to the disease of more, which is a whole different issue. But at some point, at some scale, there's only authentic Zuckerberg can be, and we're nowhere near that. Of course, I'm just giving you that as a totally extreme example. Yeah, that sort of proves the rule. And so there comes a point where what got you here won't get you there. And those are really fun pieces. I miss them. I probably should just write them anyway, but it is what it is.
And the last one you published before turning on paid was about Doomberg. And it was kind of like taking the audience, if I'm correct, kind of like taking the audience with you on this journey. And going back to that moment when you've published for free for a full year, you've done incredibly well growing your audience, both on Substack email list, but also on social. When you were about to launch paid, were there nerves? Was there angst? Or were you just
Dude,
like ready to go?
yeah, let me tell you our throw up moment. So we had originally intended to launch on April 1st, 2022, or April 2nd, sorry, because we wanted to avoid April Fool's Day.
Yeah, I was going to say that's very
Yeah.
tongue in cheek for Doomberg if launching
Yeah.
on April Fool's Day.
And so my good friend Tony Greer, who runs TG Macro newsletter, not on Substack, but very successful in his own right, and I was in his Slack room, which is great bunch of folks, and we opened up our Stripe paywall a day early just to make sure everything was working. And Tony won't mind me telling the story now because in hindsight it's funny. And we had a lot of fans in that room, and they were along for the journey from before Doomberg was a thing, and they cheered us on. And we opened the paywall in stealth mode, and a bunch of people in that room subscribed right away. A bunch of them subscribed to Pro because they're wealthy investors and so on. And Tony, who God love him, he's one of my best friends, subscribed to Annual. And then I made a joke in the room. It's like, Tony, why are you so cheap? Like, why don't you subscribe to the Pro tier? And he's like, oh my God, I didn't even know. And so he went in and canceled the Annual. And since he was an early customer and we were a new Stripe account, the Stripe algorithm deleted our account.
They thought it was fraudulent with the kind of rapid fire transactions.
Correct, because it was a bunch of transactions, then one cancellation right away. And the algorithm deleted our account, and we were horrified. And we had to we had to postpone our launch. And all of this work, and of course we couldn't get anybody, and we filed an appeal with Stripe, which was abruptly denied, and our account was closed.
Oh my gosh.
And so luckily, Edwin Dorsey, the aforementioned Edwin Dorsey, had a good relationship with Hamish and Chris from Substack. And we reached out to Edwin, and he connected us to Hamish and Chris, which was our first interaction with senior leaders on the Substack team. And they intervened with Stripe and got our account restored. Now, if we were a small, and we were like, honestly, like, this is very dangerous. Like these payroll, these payment processors are on the critical path of many young startups, right? And if you get canceled, and it's just an algorithm, and you just, all this work and all of our dreams, just like, you feel like they'd just been stolen from you for no reason at all. And it was a friend, and God bless him. Like we joke about it now, but it was a disaster, right? I remember coming home that night, like, this is just, what are we doing? Like, this is, wow. Like, we've done all this work. We're about ready to launch. And then it's all been stolen by an algorithm. And luckily, again, they intervened, and we got restored. And then we launched on April 6th, 5 days later. And that was a very searing moment, because it reminds you in the modern world just how precarious you actually are, how important banking relationships are, how important connections are to people. And like, you can't exist in an ecosystem, like in isolation in this ecosystem, I should say. You need, and if it wasn't for Edwin, God bless him. I mean, like, Edwin jumped into action. It's like, I know some people at Substack, let me hook you up. And word of mouth, and we had gained some prominence within Substack, but we didn't know Chris and Hamish at that time.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what Doomberg would be. But to Chris's credit, he reached out to his peer at Stripe and got our account restored. And now, anytime a small aspiring newsletter on Substack has the same issue and they reach out to us, we immediately connect them to Chris, and they've done a good job. And I think Stripe's gotten better at understanding what a Substack is. These were early days, right?
Yeah.
But the horror, Reed, I mean, the horror, the tennis ball in your throat, because you allow yourself to dream a little bit, given the success that we had, and to have it all taken away by an algorithm, even temporarily, was horrifying, humbling, and perhaps, for a defensive pessimist, unveiled a whole mosaic of risks that we hadn't even pondered.
You're gonna have to have people mail you cash. Which, by the way, we did that at Crunchyroll. This was before Stripe was a thing. Payment processing used to be massively difficult. And Stripe, although, that might not be the best Stripe support, Stripe endorsement, it is magical to be able to like collect subscription payments on the internet within a minute.
I will say this, and for the record, if anybody at Stripe is listening, we are huge fans. We love your product. We are more than willing to endorse it. Please don't shut our account. It is an amazing vulnerability
Yeah.
in today's society. Bankability and freedom are very, very deeply connected.
Yep.
And
commerce.
That was a visceral experience.
Yep.
One that we haven't really discussed. So there you go.
And when you came out of the gate, at post throw up moment, did you hit the ground running? Did you see a lot of early traction, or was it sluggish?
This is where we had the advantage of having partnered with other people during their launches and seeing early days versus where they ended up.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we hadn't had that data, we'd have thought that we had started slow and that this potentially was, underperforming. But given that we had several, client launches to measure against, that we were able to very early on understand that the trajectory is good and this is going to be a success. And of course, it succeeded far beyond our hopes. And so, but if we hadn't had that data, I think the first 40 days would have been more stressful than it was.
Sounds like you had the right expectations going into it. Like a launch moment is incredibly important, but subscription businesses, like any subscription business, takes a while to build.
But also having the experience of confronting nothing, everything, with the cancellation of our Stripe account, everything was gravy after that. So in a perverse way, that was another contributor to managing our expectations. And hey, at least like we have an account. Money flows to Stripe that flows to our bank account. Our bankers have checked it all out, and everybody knows what we're doing, and it's working. And so the analogy we use here is we built this box that's got a handle on it, and the harder we spin the handle, more money comes out. Well, let's just get busy spinning the handle now because at least the box is working.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so switching gears a bit, let's get into the nitty gritty. I feel like Doomberg is maybe one of the most business-oriented news, like in terms of how you approach the newsletter. You have a very systematic, business-oriented mindset and approach to how you do it. One of the things you've mentioned is the 5 pillars and how they're kind of universal and applicable in a broad set of situations. I'm curious to hear you talk more about that and unpack it a bit. Maybe we could just go through the 5 and then pick one. And I'd love for you to talk about how you've used that in the day-to-day. And, even better if we can talk through how maybe one of those points has held steady for years now, but what you do day to day has changed. I'd be curious to hear that.
Yes. So the 5 pillars, which we believe are universal to every business and that we learned in the corporate world and that we applied in our consulting business, which was an anchor of our consulting offering, basically, was we would come in and analyze your business against those 5 pillars, which then would immediately highlight deficiencies and opportunities for improvement. And then you would get busy working on those improvement opportunities highlighted by the 5 pillars analysis. So what are the 5 pillars? I'll walk through what they are and then give you a very simple definition of each. And then we could go down any of the 5 that you would like per your question. So the 5 pillars are brand, channel, technology, demand creation, and operations. And I'll take each in order. Brand, we've already discussed, is the gut feeling you induce in your ideal client when they interact with your product. Channel is the corridor in which you bump into people who are authorized to pay you. Technology is all of the tools and infrastructure you need to execute your operations plan. Demand creation is how you highlight to prospective buyers that you exist and how easy you make it for them to buy. And then operations is everything that goes into the creation and publication and ultimately, the sale of your product. And the most important part of the 5 pillars is not, well, first of all, just understanding that they exist and understanding that you should have a plan against them. But I think the thing that differentiates Doomberg the most is our authentic desire to impose upon our strategic plans for each of those 5 pillars a mindset of continuous improvement. Measure it and improve it. Like, why did this work? Why didn't that work? Let's be authentic about it. And so we have a strategic plan for each of the 5 pillars, but most importantly, we have a no bullshit, no third rails, what's working, what's not working, let's fix this for all 5. And that's almost as important as knowing what they are and having a plan against them. But as a small business owner or an entrepreneur, just having a plan for those 5 pillars and knowing that that is the sort of the cornerstone of the foundation of the house you're trying to build puts you in the top 10% of entrepreneurs easily. And so happy to take any of those 5 or whatever grabs your interest.
I think there's one that definitely sticks out, and it's the one that kind of comes up in every conversation: demand generation. How can I get more people aware of what I'm doing? How can I get them interested? How can I, grow my email list, paid subscribers, etc.? And you and I have talked a lot about like building reliable growth channels. So I'd love to just hear you kind of kick that off, and then I got a few questions to dig in. But yeah, talk to me about demand generation.
Yeah, so there's demand generation in the newsletter business, and then there's demand generation in general. In the newsletter business, the customer journey is very well understood. It is impression, engagement, email, paid, premium. And our view is you want to create as many of all 5 of those as possible. But the way to do it is that at each node in that customer journey, you have to create overwhelming value relative to cost. You have to occasionally remind people there's more value to the right. Then you have to make it very easy for them to go there. And that's it. So create an enormous amount of impressions, create an enormous amount of engagements, capture as many free emails as you can, then convert as many of them to paid, and then upsell to the people that are paying you to premium. And that's universal in the newsletter business. So the question then becomes, how do you generate those impressions and those engagements on the front end? In our journey at the time, you mentioned FinTwit earlier, this was the way to create a mountain of impressions. And so we approached Twitter as an independent part of our business with a specific purpose, which is to delight our potential ideal customers on Twitter and then bring them up that customer journey to engagement and ultimately to email. So the strategic intent of the Doomberg Twitter account was to convince people to give us their email on Substack. Over time, that changed a bit because we understood the power of podcasts. But building an audience on what we would call sort of a shotgun social media platform is important so that you can port them over to what we would call a rifle social media platform like Substack. And so TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, those are classic shotgun social media platforms where basically everybody's on it, and you want to sort of fish in as many ponds as you can for your ideal clients. But it's important that we treated Twitter in the early days as a separate outlet for our product that had to be on brand. And so we created value on Twitter, but then occasionally reminded people, hey, we have the Substack, and why don't you come on over? And Twitter is a source of both impressions and engagement. So one of the things that we learned over time is the most powerful form of engagement for the content creator universe is to be heard on a podcast. And one of the things we learned is in the beginning, of course, growing Twitter was directly correlated to growing an email list because we had neither. We had none of either. But once you got big, Twitter became less and less important. Ultimately, there's diminished return on Twitter because Twitter is actually, and in reality, nothing more than social proof to get invited on podcasts. And once you get big enough, the podcast invites, if you're good at podcasts, which is one of our brand ambitions, is we shall be the best podcast guest possible, because the most powerful form of engagement is to be heard on a podcast. So we do, as you know, an enormous amount of podcasts. We take every invite that passes our social screen, and we treat every podcast appearance like our business depends on it, because it does. Big, small, it doesn't matter. We prepare the same. We show up on time. We're as professional as we can be. We deliver the very best performance we can. And then other podcast creators hear that. And we share, by the way, our audience with them so that they see, hopefully, an uptick in their downloads, which is their measurement. And if you do that, you create this army of other creators who will retweet your stuff or suggest you to their friends. And you just create this sea of abundance, this great goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, as we got big enough on Twitter, incremental return on Twitter was 0. And all of our return came from being a good guest on podcasts, which is why we were able to leave Twitter eventually. But if you're growing and you have to start somewhere, you need a significant presence on a shotgun social media platform that you work to optimize against that algorithm to deliver to your potential ideal clients really great content that convinces them to engage and ultimately give you an email. And if you don't do those things, no matter how good your product is, it just gets tossed into the crowded bin of great stuff never read.
Yeah, I love that quote. Oh man, that really stuck with me, because this was on your interview with Hamish, at least where I heard it. And you said, you were talking about like how uncomfortable it can be for people who publish on the internet to promote their work. And a lot of people will just write and, like you were talking about, have this romantic idea of like writing on the internet. And everybody will, if you put something truly great out there, the audience will find it. But in reality, that's not really what happens. And I just wanted to double underline.
So that was in our piece. These chairs aren't going to sell themselves, where we talked about the Eames chair and how the iconic Eames lounge chair is really a quintessential example of flagship marketing, which is, wow, like this chair that is out of reach for me. By the way, they're like $8,500 a chair, so they're out of reach for a lot of people. But the vast majority of the Eames products were totally accessible to the everyday consumer. And if you sit in an Eames chair at the store, the gut feeling that is induced in you is, wow, this is the perfect piece of furniture. And if the geniuses who created this are also going to create this $100 bar stool, I'm going to go ahead and buy that $100 bar stool, right?
Yeah.
And so the whole concept, like they're great, affordable chairs would have been unknown if it weren't for the iconic Eames chair and the brilliant marketing they did around their design studio, which they called 901.
Yeah.
And so we studied that very carefully because, again, I think I said at the very beginning of this podcast, like, go and study what successful people have done and steal it. Mm-hmm. Like, it's all out there. You could do it. And on the demand creation side, the starving artist motif is a bit of a cop-out for a lot of people. Like, my work is great. It should just be appreciated as art. And that's fine. But the vast majority of brilliant, quote-unquote, artists are recognized after they're dead. And that's unacceptable to me. Like,
totally.
Yeah. And so you have to sell yourself. And there are ways to do it on brand. So one of the things that we're always focused on is there a way for us to grow our customer base on brand, which we can talk about when we get to the sort of customer acquisition part of our 2024 strategy. We will not do things that are on brand, that aren't on brand. And so, because then that just puts a pin in the whole balloon, right? It just collapses the brand purity. And so we are pondering this question very deeply. Like, have we reached our plateau, for example, is an interesting question of ours. And we may very well have, given our self-imposed, brand limitations, as opposed to our behavior and what we're willing to do.
On the podcast side, I want to unpack that a bit, because I think it's a huge part of, like we were just talking about, a huge part of your, it's a meaningful growth channel for Doomberg. How do you find opportunities to be a guest on podcasts? Or is that like entirely inbound, or do you ever reach out to people to ask?
All inbound.
All inbound. Yeah.
100% inbound. And the way you get inbound is to deliver when you go on podcasts. And like we study, we deliver, we show up, we're professional. I don't care if a podcast has 400 downloads an episode or 400,000 downloads an episode. I treat them all the same. Same level of professionalism. Here's our files that you need for your, you know, your own promotion work. We will, retweet it when we're still on Twitter. We'll restack it on notes. For some podcast appearances that we really like, we'll send them to our full email list. We don't like to pester our email list, but for the occasional, good podcast appearance. But we did. It's a goal of ours. I'll tell you, we did 117 podcast appearances last year.
Oh my goodness, that's
we averaged
basically one every 3 days. Yeah,
and
wow.
All we did was accept every podcast invitation that came in that passed our social screen. Like, we'll take a look and make sure, like, we're not going on, the KKK show. But like, by and large, in the finance world, most people color within the lines. And we're happy to go on anybody who will be nice enough to invite us. And then if you get a reputation for being a good guest, and you accept every invite that comes in. Sorry, you were going to ask?
Have you changed how you evaluate opportunities? Like, so you did 117 last year. Are you going for like 150 or 200 this year? Or do you feel like you're in
our goal is to go on every podcast that is nice enough to invite us. It's a privilege to go on people's podcasts.
You heard it here. All you got to do is reach out.
If you pass our social screen, we will go on your show. And by the way, we've been guests on shows that haven't even launched yet, and we're their first guests. And then sometimes they don't even launch. Like, I don't care. It's not work. I mean, I'll show up and talk about Doomberg. I love Doomberg. It's the work of my life. Why wouldn't I want to talk about what we've written about or how we built it? Or, I was very much. You're literally the only thing on my schedule today. And I was like very much looking forward to this conversation. Like, I love Reed. I'm very happy for him. I'm happy that he got married. I'm happy that he, sold his company to Substack and then, did his tour of duty there and is now trying to figure out what he's going to do next. And I know that I'm going to be able to help Reed. And someday you and I will probably work on something together. Like, what a great privilege. My work for today is to sit here and shoot the shit with you. Like,
it's not bad.
Not a bad life, right? Yeah. And like, I don't care if you never publish this. I honestly don't.
Hopefully people listen to this at some point. Okay, I want to go back to social, because social was a really big part of Doomberg at the start, Twitter in particular. Why not like Instagram or TikTok or have you thought about other social platforms to kind of continue to grow your audience? Or
we didn't know those platforms. And there was a critical mass of our ideal clients in FinTwit. And like any startup, we had to conserve our resources, which really was the time of the very small team that we have. And so we decided to focus all of our efforts on something that we thought would work. The classic minimum viable product, to put it in the startup vernacular. We knew that if we just spun the handle on that box, it would spin out enough to make this worthwhile. And we would much rather focus our efforts on something that we know works and optimize it than to spread our efforts across a variety of things that may or may not work and get lost in the noise while searching for signal. And so now, as we're pondering customer acquisition, of course, we'd have to develop presence on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, not Twitter, but Facebook, and so on, as we ponder whether there's a way for us to grow our audience via paid. But when we were doing it all sort of sweat alpha, just us, making sure every post was on brand, and so on, Twitter was a guaranteed way to work that we understood well. And so in the startup world, you do what you know works over and over and over again until you reach escape velocity.
So we could see a Doomberg Instagram account or Doomberg TikTok channel at some point, but it definitely wasn't what made the most sense early on.
Right, and that would be more because you have to be on those platforms in order to buy ads. And you might want to target your ideal clients, and it would be a less authentic experience. And we're not even sure it's going to work, and we're just beginning to learn all of those things now. Because again, I think zero budget for customer acquisition for an organization that generates our revenue is suboptimal. And if there's a way that we could profitably buy customers with an acceptably short payback period, we'd be foolish not to try to uncover that, because we have demonstrated product market fit. But
Have you
we've decided that this is the year we explore that question.
have you learned anything so far with any paid ads experiments?
We've not done any paid ad experiments because we're doing an awful lot of groundwork first, including building lookalike audiences and understanding who our actual ideal clients are versus our conceived mosaics that we created before we launched Doomberg, which is a whole other journey. And we are very careful to protect the brand, so we're going very slow. Because thou shalt not screw up the brand is the dominant.
Do you have that like over your office door or something?
Does this delight Brad? Yeah. But in all honesty, that question, which I just articulated, can we profitably buy customers with an acceptably short payback period that is on brand, in a way that is on brand, is something that I am obsessed with. Because then you could create a flywheel.
Yeah. Then it's systematic. You just,
Right.
you have it on, you optimize it, and it can be I've been thinking about this a lot because every call I have, people are asking like, how do I grow my email list? How do I get more paid subscribers? It's all acquisition oriented. And I've been thinking about how a big part of the growth strategy in the streaming world was social, including paid ads and organic, using those platforms organically. You had your own handle, and you had a team of people who were dedicated, spent all their time running those accounts, building up awareness, audience, similar to what you did with Doomberg on Twitter year one. And we spent a lot of money on Facebook and Google as well. And I feel like I don't know if those growth channels are in hyper growth mode anymore.
So there are some emerging trends and technological developments that make that more interesting. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. And the additional constraint that we've layered on top of this project of has to be on brand might torpedo the success of it. We aren't willing to risk the thing we've created to reach for more. But with the development of AI, I know which is a bit of a corny thing, we are engaging with a few interesting people in this space that we've grown to trust, and that we are willing to be sort of their proof point story as they start their own businesses, to learn about sort of rapid A/B testing and understanding the data and all the things that goes with it. And by the way, we have a sort of a deeper objective, which is if we could figure out how to profitably buy customers with an acceptably short payback period that is on brand, that is very valuable, well beyond Doomberg. And I have a few other swings left in me. The team has a few other swings left in them. This journey of continuous improvement, I sort of would view the Doomberg team now as a series of CEOs with an exit behind them in the same way that you are, which is very valuable in the VC startup world. I personally do a lot of work in the VC world, and I probably see 200 to 300 pitches a year, and I've always been fascinated about the prospect of maybe someday being, a founder myself. And so I view all of these skills that we're trying to learn as arrows, to be used for some, swing down the road. Once Doomberg runs its course.
It's really fascinating. I feel like acquisition, as I've been trying to write newsletter posts about like what we learned from streaming and just building mostly consumer media businesses, but specifically consumer subscription media. And the thing that's hard to write about acquisition is that the channels are always evolving, the opportunities are always evolving. And at the end of the day, it's just arbitrage, and the frameworks those are steady. But the tactics are all over the place.
So there's a reason for that, which is the platform hosts want to take all of the value from you. And so once you crack how Facebook works, how Instagram works, how TikTok works, they will very quickly, like Amazon sees a startup seller that has demonstrated product market fit, and suddenly there's an Amazon knockoff that its algorithm boosts and they put you out of business. And so in reality, these platforms, the advertising platforms, are dynamic opposition to you.
Right.
And the more success you have, the more likely it is to be fleeting. And
Yeah.
so this is very important for people to understand. Like Facebook and Google are amongst the highest market cap companies in the world, not because they're equitably sharing the value the two of you are co-creating. It's because they are observing their customers and who's doing well and fleecing them. And so you have to be dynamic. It is not a static picture. It's not a one and done. And part of our strategy is to understand all of that. And look, if we come to the conclusion that it can't be done on brand, then we'll just happily continue to do at this rate, and then figure out what we'll do next after that.
It's it's telling that, yeah, a lot of the social platforms are becoming less open to being used as audience development platforms and then having that business done elsewhere. It's they are starting to build more hooks within the product. TikTok, which is like the newest big social platform, there's no external linking. Instagram, very difficult to link out to a website for you to like have any kind of commerce with your audience or capture first party data to be able to communicate with them. So yeah, it's really interesting to think about like where the natural bend in a lot of these platforms. YouTube's
So
another good example where like they have Shopify trays, they have subscriptions on YouTube. They're trying to have more of that commerce happen on platform versus
so when you're small and trying to grow, you can still hack those social media platforms, but it requires a lot of guerrilla work on your own part, which is we got so much in the way of engagement by direct messaging on Twitter, like people that would eventually become paying customers reaching out to us, responding to all of them, personally responding to tweets, personally responding to inbound emails after we wrote pieces. That works to an extent when you're small. And it can only be authentically either me or the editor in chief responding to all these things because people sense when it's like a sort of a canned response, right? So when you're growing, you could do that. When you're trying to scale, then you have to understand that when you're flipping from organic to paid, there's only so much climbing of the mountain yourself you can do. You have to pay for a few lift rides, and again, these platforms aren't in the business of co-creating value with you and sharing it equitably. They're in the business of taking your money. And you need to
right.
understand, like the old adage is you don't have that person is not your banker, they're just a banker. This is something that stuck with me from the private equity days of our team. Like bankers want to lend to you so they can take your stuff, right? Like
Yes.
there's no such thing as your banker. There's only a banker.
Yep.
And Facebook doesn't give a shit about your business. They want to take as much of your money as possible. They have quarterly Wall Street expectations to meet. Amazon will steal your IP and dare you to sue them. Contracts are only as good as you're willing to sue to enforce them. They will run roughshod over you. You have to learn to jujitsu their unique attributes to your own benefit, ethically, of course, and be mindful of the fact that the more successful you are, the more likely you are to be a target of extractive efforts on their part for the value that you've created for your team.
Yep. One switching gears a little bit, one quote that I've heard you say that I absolutely love that I think is representative of like a post-internet world is, quote, barrier to entry is zero, barrier to success is high. Could you unpack that for us a little bit and kind of think about or tell us about how that has impacted how you approach Doomberg?
Anybody can start a blog. And if you had told me when I was quitting the corporate world to launch our own business that the thing that would decide whether we would be successes or not would be whether or not we could make a business out of a blog, I'd still be in the corporate world. It's just reality, right? But our experience with Doomberg and watching the experience of others who have succeeded in recent times with the evolving nature of this platform tells us that no matter how old the idea is, disciplined execution is still a durable moat. Like people think like overnight success is just like got lucky. The amount of work below the water level of the pyramid that you're seeing is enormous, as you know, because you saw our journey from the inside for a lot of it. Like we work very hard on Doomberg. We are perfectionists. We live, eat, sleep, dream, die this brand, this project. Every piece is the very best piece we've ever written, or we don't hit send. Every typo is a kick in the groin. Every customer that we acquire is a joyous event, and every subscriber that unsubscribes is a punch in the gut. We authentically, this is the work of our lives. This is what we're meant to do, and we've caught lightning in a bottle, and we are going to ride this for as long as we can. But we worked and still work our tails off on this project, and our loyal subscribers know that. We've never half-assed a piece. We've never published because it's been too long since we last published. We have plenty of pieces that I have fully written where the editor said, "We're not doing this. We're not going to publish this piece. Start over."
Yep.
And we all have a veto on this team.
That's the brand promise.
It's the brand promise. Like, this doesn't delight Brad. No, do better.
Yep.
Like, go do better. This is not going out on the Doomberg masthead. And we never publish anything unless everybody agrees. And we never publish anything unless we're proud to publish it. And look, they're not all great in hindsight. They don't all land. But when they don't land, that's as valuable as when they do. Let's go study why. What was it about this piece that didn't work? Wow, the cut to paid came too late, or there wasn't enough enticement, or we were wrong. We got something materially wrong in that article, and that hurt our brand. Why did we get that wrong? What can we improve about our operations performance? These 5-pillar strategy plans are living documents. And every time we have a mistake, there's only 2 reasons why we could have a mistake. The operations plan wasn't followed, or the operations plan was inadequate. And so which one of those was it, and what are we going to do about it?
Maybe to close this out, because I've already grabbed too much of your time, even if I am the only thing on your calendar today. You've probably got a bunch of stuff to go right. One of the defining characteristics of Doomberg, another one, is how much you help aspiring writers, aspiring creators, people who are trying to follow the Doomberg path, and a lot of the other pioneers on Substack or other platforms like it. If there's anybody in that position out there listening to this, what are some pieces of advice you would give them as they're just getting going?
So the philosophy behind doing that is that giving is infinitely valuable, and surfing the sea of abundance is just a superior way to live. And our view is that as computers perfect more and more of what it used to be that humans did, the things that make us quintessentially human will become more valuable. And in particular, content creation and consumption, be it written, audio, or video, is going to be a huge mega trend as AI and robotics takes over from humans the labor that used to be considered valuable, that used to be considered something that you should do to create and sustain a reasonable livelihood for your families. And so our view is that this market is growing way faster than any individual could outcompete us. And it's a superior way to live, to just give to everybody and to surf that sea of abundance. And by doing so, you create an army of like-minded individuals who will help you if and when you need it. And our view is that if we help somebody and they go on to displace Doomberg from the top spot on the finance paid leaderboard, we'll be the first to congratulate them. Like, great. That doesn't detract from us. It adds to us because we help this person along their way, and look at how great they're doing. This comes back to a sort of a overarching philosophy of our team, which is that Confidence is an absolute measure, and arrogance is a relative one. So we are absolutely confident in our ability to produce high quality product and to delight our ideal clients. And we don't take too much joy in how we're doing relative to other people. How other people are doing. If they're doing less well than we are, that's sad for them. And if they're doing better than we are, that's great for them. And neither of those two measurements involves us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a sort of an altruistic mindset that we have. And I do believe it actually pays off because we're genuine about it. I'm very much looking forward to what, Read 4.0 will be, I guess, counting your various journeys. And instinctively that we would genuinely drop everything to help you if you reached a tough point in your journey in Read 4.0. And we would do so authentically with no expectation of remittance.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just keep doing that for as many people as possible, you never know when, magic fairy dust falls out of the sky. And it just does. It's a great way to live. It's just a great way to live.
It's a great, it's really great to surround yourself with people who think like that, because it's all non-zero sum thinking. And the Steve Jobs quote that I love is you can only connect the dots looking back. And you never know how all of this is going to unravel. And it's generally good to help others. And that is just good karma. And usually it's beneficial, and it supports this rising tides lifts all boats dynamic.
Yeah, and look, Ayn Rand would say we're being selfish, right? Because we have determined that this is a superior way for us in the set of outcomes that are possible. But at the same time, it is like Edwin Dorsey. Edwin flew out here, and we shared everything we knew about growing our newsletter with him, and he shared everything he knew about growing his newsletter with us, and we're good friends. And of course, Edwin is also the person who bailed us out when Stripe canceled our account. This is just the way it is. And Edwin knows that if he called any member of the Doomberg team and opened the conversation by saying, "I need your help," we'd drop everything for Edwin.
Yep.
Tony Greer, Grant Williams, Adam Taggart. Pick your favorite high-profile finance content creators. We've all gotten to know each other behind the scenes. We have an authentic relationship of giving. I sleep very well. I go to bed knowing I haven't screwed anybody in life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not worried about looking at my phone in the morning.
Yeah.
It's just a great way to live.
I was listening to Charlie Munger interview with one of the Collison brothers, and he just kept talking about making money the right way and not being scammy. And it was just really fascinating to hear somebody with that much experience talking about being selective and operating a certain way.
We could. I know how to. In fact, we joked internally that we could build the following two Substacks: Red Meat for liberals and Red Meat for conservatives.
Yeah.
And we would write both of them, and we could pull it off. We know the growth hacks. We know how to do it, and they would be wildly successful. Both of those would make more money than Doomberg. Given everything we've learned, we know that is what we can do. Who wants to do that for a living?
Totally.
It could be done. I know how to build Red Meat for conservatives.
Yep.
And I know how to build Red Meat for liberals. I know how to brand it. I know where to find them. I know who the ideal clients are.
Yeah,
I
that
know
would
what
be
they
some
want to
fun
consume.
character sketches.
we could totally do it both sides.
Yep.
And there's no shortage of people trying to do that. But given everything we've learned, I think we could do it pretty well. But that would be succumbing to the disease of more, doing things you don't like that isn't authentic for a few more bucks. And what a sad existence. And again,
Absolutely.
I have aspirations. Everybody has aspirations. Someday I'd like to found a company that becomes a unicorn. Who wouldn't?
Absolutely.
And I'm putting all of the learnings into my back pocket over time, and maybe I'll take that swing someday. But I'll do it on our terms, with the same ethics. And if that's not possible, then it won't work.
That's really great. I think that's a great place to wrap. Doomberg, thank you so much for joining and giving us all the wisdom, all your wisdom. This was a lot of fun to talk to you.
Same here, Reed, and truly heartfelt congratulations. Really looking forward to Reed 4.0, as I called it earlier. And as you know, a standing invitation to come see us and extract everything you can from us that might be helpful for your journey.
Love it. Thank you, Doomberg. A huge thank you to Doomberg for joining us today, and thank you for tuning in. If you want to get future episodes straight to your inbox, please subscribe to the newsletter, and we'll see you soon.